Welcome. We are on episode 341 of COVID Calls. It is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic. We host a diverse collection of experts in the disaster space. My name is KRISTIN UrquIZA, and I'm so excited to be joining you as a guest host for the day. And this is my second time guest hosting. I will also be back next Tuesday as a guest host as well. For those who may not know me, I am the co-founder and co-executive director of Marked by COVID. It's a national, grassroots-powered nonprofit and nonpartisan organization that promotes accountability, recognition, justice, and a pandemic-free future. We elevate truth and science, and it was founded just days after I lost my first-generation Mexican-American father, Mark, to the pandemic in Arizona. And I'm coming to you live from San Francisco, California. So today I am honored to be in conversation with three individuals who a year ago were complete strangers to me. And now I consider to be three of my close friends. Their names are Rima Saman, Marcos Lutyens, and Brad Wolf. All three of these individuals are knee deep in the work to memorialize and honor and recognize the people that we have lost this pandemic, our collective trauma and collective toll of loss, and to ensure that that memorialization resonates with the people who've been most impacted as well as everyone else. But before we jump into that discussion, I want to just remind folks that you can catch COVID Calls live weekdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can do that through the YouTube channel, and you can also hear COVID Calls anytime recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere where you get your podcasts. And please keep in touch. You can follow the conversation via Twitter at US of Disaster, as well as at COVID Calls. And if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing at Marked by COVID, please follow us as well at Marked by COVID on Twitter. So as we get started today talking about memorials, I just want to lay the groundwork a little bit what I've been thinking about since losing my dad to this pandemic and the work that Marked by COVID has been doing on memorials. Before we begin, I must note that as of today, September 14th, 2021, there have been 4,645,139 deaths across the world. That's an increase of 64,101 deaths since I last guest hosted COVID Calls. Here in the United States, we have lost at least 662,928 people to this pandemic. And I say we have, lost at least because while those are the official numbers from the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Response Resource Center, we also know that there are probably additional people who we've lost to this pandemic early on, whenever we weren't quite up to speed on how to account for deaths, as well as throughout the course of the last 2 years, where people have had to delay medical treatment. People have, opted not to go to the hospital and have passed in different ways. So this is a huge, monumental amount of human life lost. So when thinking about this question of memorials, I often find myself asking this question of just how do we create an accurate public memory of what happened? And also, how do we start to heal the trauma of a generation from losing so many people? I believe that part of the answer lies with proper recognition of our losses and our collective trauma. When I introduced Marked by COVID at the top of the call, the word recognition is in our mission to ensure proper recognition of this pandemic and its impacts on human life. Recognition is also one of the R's in our policy platform, our 5R policy platform for COVID justice: recognition, ensuring that we account for the unvarnished truth of what happened and why, so that this never happens again, and we pass on the learnings to future generations, that infinite wisdom from our lived experience. So the question remains, how do we go about starting to memorialize this pandemic? What does it look like? What questions do we need to start asking ourselves? But before I go much further, I just want to admit that I have never gravitated towards memorials. And that feels important to note in this moment. And it's a little nerve-wracking to have to admit that. But when I reflect upon that, simply put, overall, memorials have often been tools to advance revisionist history. Oftentimes, they portray an inaccurate or one-sided view of historical events. They often glorify a single individual, usually male, usually white, when the reality is a lot more complicated. And most events are made possible through the efforts of countless people. Or they stand to prop up the rich, whose wealth oftentimes comes from terrible beginnings. So take, for example, John C. Calhoun, a man whose name up until 2015 was given the honor of gracing one of the 12 residential colleges at Yale University. When I was a student there in the early 2000s, Calhoun was commonplace, the name. And all I knew of him was that he had been a vice president. Didn't really think anything else of it. But later, after graduating, I would learn that he was an adamant defendant of slavery and used his political powers to advance the interests of the white South, trying to keep slavery intact. So in the wake of the movement for Black Lives, a lively debate ensued starting in 2013. And after 2 years of campaigning and discussion on campus and with alumni, the university changed the name of the residential college. Now, Mr. Calhoun's name still exists around campuses, but in a much more limited and not so glorified status as one of the 12 residential colleges. This type of story, it's become more commonplace in the last 5 years. This discovery that more and more of our memorials serve to glorify people or perspectives that reinforce a problematic narrative of white supremacy. So believe me, I was surprised to hear myself saying just a few weeks after my dad died from COVID in June 2020 that we need memorials and we need to memorialize this entire event. But the second thing that came out of my mouth was, we have got to make sure that we do not tell this whitewashed Christopher Columbus version of what happened here in the United States. So that's when I started to think about memorials in a bigger sense of how do we go about being able to tell as wide of a story, as impactful as a story, and create a space and multiple spaces in which people can show up and have their grief witnessed, have their grief witnessed by themselves and one another, but also see their experience reflected in a meaningful way. And that brought marked by COVID to realize that we need to advance not only permanent memorials, but a permanent COVID Memorial Day, and a day in our calendar in which we can say, listen, this was real. This happened. It had profound impacts. And for the next several years, we are going to observe this, to be able to cry out loud, to mourn out loud, to experience the heaviness of this pandemic on our lives and recognize our losses. But this also will serve to benefit future generations. See, something that I think a lot about back whenever I was a kid was how things like the observance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday in mid-January was such an essential tool for me as a young person to learn about the civil rights leader. Just like how Black History Month was a time for our teachers to teach us about additional important people in Black history, whether it be Harriet Tubman or Malcolm X. COVID Memorial Day is a gift that we can not only give ourselves, but to future generations to be able to engage in and start to have a meaningful dialogue about public health measures, and also about this pandemic and the way that it changed our lives forever and everything that we lost from it. So with that, I would like to introduce one of my guests today. Her name is Rima Salmon. She is the founder of Rami's Heart COVID-19 Memorial. And Rima has been working tirelessly since earlier this year to memorialize those lost to COVID-19. And I am so excited to have Rima here with me today to share a little bit more about what that looks like and what she's been up to in New Jersey. Welcome to the podcast, Rima.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So Rima has been super involved with the work of Marked by COVID in advancing our call for a permanent COVID Memorial Day, but she's also been in the vanguard and on the forefront of advancing permanent memorials, starting with her own. Rima, can you tell us a little bit about the memorial that you started?
Absolutely. So my brother passed away last year on Mother's Day, May 10th of 2020. And we were at the peak of the pandemic. We were at 80,000 lives lost in the U.S., which doesn't sound like many, but unfortunately, at that time, we were also at our tightest restrictions. So as far as the funeral goes, we were only permitted to have 10 people at the funeral. And we had to get my brother cremated. So my mother and I decided to hold off. And the idea was that once things would open back up, we can have some sort of, celebration of life or something. But as time went on and the number, continued to rise up, we realized that there's probably not ever going to be a right time. So this January, on January 25th, would have been my brother's 41st birthday. I had been watching my mom really struggle with losing her baby, her youngest child. I was struggling, having lost my brother. We were still in quarantine. So, you're mourning isolated. You're not surrounded by loved ones or friends or family. And having felt that, I decided to build a yellow heart made out of painted clamshells. And the idea was to write names on pebble stones and put them inside the heart. And at 6:30 at night, I was going to light it up with candles. And my notion was if my brother was looking down from heaven, or, he'd be able to see it just like a birthday cake. So I invited locals and people from New Jersey, asking them if they wanted to add their loved ones in there. That night we probably got maybe like 100 names, and about 20 strangers showed up, which was really a little bit humbling, because again, I had felt so lonely. You know, what people don't realize is COVID took away a lot of our normal grieving processes that our society has set up for us. And because we've never been through something like this, we've always taken them for granted, but they do serve a purpose in our grieving process and us getting closure. So it was really humbling to see 20 strangers cared enough to come and pay their respects. Ironically, probably half those strangers did not lose anybody. They were just there to support. And we all said a prayer. We all, there was a gentleman there by the name of John Walsh that came and he sang. And then we left for the night. And I even remember as I was leaving, there was a girl named Jennifer there who had lost her father. She drove 45 minutes down to put a rock for her father, and asked me what she should do because she left a candle for her dad. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll come back tomorrow and I'll clean it up. And we went to bed. And my idea was that I would go back tomorrow morning and clean the memorial up. But instead, we woke up to over 200 messages. It had hit social media. People were asking me to add their loved ones in there. And knowing where they were coming from, I couldn't say no. So the concept, was, okay, well, I'll keep it up for another week and I'll add these names. But the names just kept flowing in. And next thing you know, 1 heart became 2, and 2 hearts became 3, and 3 hearts became 5, and 5 became 8. And it just kept going. And when we hit the 10 hearts, we were at 2,000 names. We realized that it was going to have to come off the beach. And it was at that time where we had to make a decision whether we take it apart or do we try to find something, instead of it. And I think the opening moment for me was we had a huge storm and the ocean water reached the memorial, and it kind of washed away the top of Heart 1, which is where my brother's rock was. So the next day I went back to fix it, and there was about 16 to 20 rocks missing. So I start digging through the sand. I'm finding everybody's name but my brother's. So I panicked and I just kept digging and digging and digging, and I was just going crazy. And I don't know if you're religious or not, but I was talking to God, I can't believe you saved everybody's rock after all this work I've done, but not my brother's. And then I finally found it. And when I found it, I was crying. And, I looked at my partner, Travis, and I was like, oh my God, I found it. I can't believe I'm crying over a stupid rock. And, he looked at me, he's like, now you know why, how other people feel. And it was at that moment I knew that we needed a memorial, and I knew that we could not take it apart. We could not demolish it. I knew that it was going to break everybody's heart again. So we decided to move forward with trying to permanentalize it. But as you know, it's been very, very hard journey. We've reached out to our politicians. We've reached out to our state representatives. And we could not get any proper assistance whatsoever, let alone really a reply. So we made the decision to go the private way. Go ahead.
And you are, first of all, I just need to take a beat and think about that. You just do such an incredible job of describing this organic memorial coming up after you took the time to honor your brother. And it just really demonstrates to me such a huge need to recognize our losses. And that line from Travis, now you know how other people feel.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is missing from our society overall.
Absolutely.
Really recognizing how we all feel right now.
Right. And I think that's the key thing about this memorial was, every day we're working on it. Every day we were there to clean up the mess. People would bring flowers and leave them for their loved ones, and obviously they would die. And we were very, very cautious of not polluting the ocean, so we would go every day, clean up whatever's left over, whatever died, we would clean it up. And while we're there, we would constantly get peeking by and thanking us and crying and telling us how grateful they were. And like, I remember this old gentleman, probably in his late 70s, walking on a walker almost every day to the beach. And one day we ran into him and he thanked us and he said, this rock is all I have. I come here and talk to my wife every day. I don't even have a tombstone or a grave for her. And that's the reality. Like, I don't have a tombstone for my brother. I don't have a grave for my brother. So again, I could relate to that person. I understand how they feel. And at the same time, whether you've lost a father, a brother, a mother, a sister, whoever you've lost during this pandemic, if you've lost it during those times where we've had those restrictions, you feel that you've been robbed or a piece of your goodbye is missing, which doesn't allow us to get that complete closure. So, right. And again, like, the making the memorial permanent, this is another example, is so we found a carpenter. We had him build shadow boxes and we preserved each heart as though it was on the beach into these shadow boxes. They're glued down and we had to put them in storage while we were finding a permanent location. So on July 25th of this year, which is exactly 6 months after my brother's birthday, we found a place at Alair Community Farms through a volunteer here who ironically lost her mother. Her mother's in heart 6. And we were able to come to agreement. They're giving us a piece of the property to build a garden here and preserve the hearts and display them. But what was really ironic was the day we were bringing the hearts here from storage, we loaded up the trailer and there's 5 or 6 cars of us following this trailer to the farm because, for hazard reasons. And we're driving slowly. And I remember Trav and I, we looked at each other and Trav said, this feels like, we're following the hearse from a funeral. Yeah. And I said, I know, it feels like we're putting all these lives to rest now. And then when we arrived and we got out of the car, another volunteer just came running right up to me and she was very emotional. And she goes, oh my God, I feel like we're at a funeral. We just followed the hearse finally to the graveyard. Mm-hmm. And it's that feeling. And even, now we're down to the, last few days of permanentized memorial. We're 4 days away. And even as we're working, we're coming in at 7 a.m. and leaving at 10 p.m. And throughout the day, I get very tearful because I finally feel like I'm getting that closure. I'm getting that, like I'm putting my brother and all these other spirits and souls, to rest. They can finally have a resting place. And they didn't die in vain. Like, we're going to remember them. And I feel that, that's what they deserve. And that's exactly why we decided to go the private route. Where we got lucky was we looked at each other and we said, like, this is probably going to be like a 2 or 3 year project, and here we are almost 9 months later, and it's almost 100%. So
tell me what's happening on Friday.
Okay, so on Friday, we are having a ribbon cutting ceremony. So we've been building a garden around the memorial. The garden will not be completed by Friday. We kind of jumped the gun on that one, but it will be beautifully displayed for the event. But at least the hearts will be out, in the yard, in the garden, so you guys can see where, people can visit them at any time. And we are going to do a lighting ceremony as well to honor all the lives lost currently to COVID by lighting a candle for each 1,000 lives lost.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how can people participate who are interested in following along?
So we have a Facebook page where we will be streaming live at 6 p.m. We also have a videographer coming. Once we get the footage, it'll post again to the websites, to Facebook, to other links where you can probably go on YouTube and watch it a few days later. And then we also will be having, what else? I'm trying to think. Actually, that's it right now. I know that there's going to be some news outlets coming in to stream it as well. Most likely, News 12 New Jersey, which is on the East Coast, and then CBS 2, which is all New York or Pennsylvania East Coast. So
that's so exciting. And I encourage folks to tune in to Rami's Heart COVID-19 Memorial on Facebook to watch the ribbon cutting ceremony and participate virtually in this momentous occasion. Part of what is so moving to me about this entire experience is that you, Rima, have been so persistent in ensuring that the people who have been entrusted, the spirits, the honor of the people that have been entrusted in this project are properly taken care of. And you've done it with a team of volunteers in your community. And it will be the first permanent national memorial as a result. So
absolutely.
Congratulations. I know that you have put in so much blood, sweat, and tears, figuratively and literally, into this.
Yes.
And I do know that you have to run in order to get back to the project, but I would love to hear, why to you are memorials so important? And why not only do we have to, there's no option. Why do we have to do this for this pandemic?
Well, I think that, from the start of your call, when you were speaking about memorials, I think with generations, the display of memorials is changing. The last tragedy our nation has had was 9/11. And when you visit the 9/11 memorial, it doesn't look like other memorials. There's artifacts there that are, people's IDs, or their watches, their clothing items that were found in the rubbish. There's pieces of the tower, there's voicemails that you can hear, there's personal belongings, and even pictures and photographs that you can see of them with their loved one. And you don't leave that memorial museum without getting some sort of education behind the tragedy and feeling the loss that our nation felt that day. And thereafter we see, even there, we honor the firefighters and the policemen that ran in there and also lost their lives. And then through that museum, they use the fundings to support those families that were impacted and help the police fighters and the firefighters that not only were impacted but became ill because they ran into the debris. So what I think is important is moving forward in that direction as well. We don't want just a wall with names on it. We want to see the story behind the name. We want something that's a representation of that. This way, when somebody visits the location, they can get a story behind it, and they can also feel, what we have felt in that loss. Because if we educate people, the reality is that's where the empathy will come in. If we can get people to relate, then they will understand why we felt so important. We felt that this was so important, and in addition to that, having the memorial will allow us to raise funds to support the communities. We talk about losses, but at the same time, what about all the children that have lost a mother and a father, and now they're in a single parent home, and God forbid it's the breadwinner. Now they're losing their home. They're not able to participate in all the extracurricular activities that both their parents were paying for, and it's known that children suffer the most. And right now we know that over 53,000 children have been impacted so far.
Yeah.
And at this point, we have lost more, when we were in DC, that Veterans Wall, like we found out you'd have to walk around that Veterans Wall more than 6 times to, basically get to close enough of a number of how many we've lost so far through COVID. So I do think memorials are important. I think the visualization of them shows you the loss, but I think that we still have a lot to go forward with, having the memorial show more than just the loss, showing the impact and showing the history, showing the education, and maybe even where we went wrong, so that, you visit this memorial and you walk away with some sort of knowledge and some sort of information moving forward.
I love it. Well, I know you need to run.
Yeah.
So on that note, I want to just say thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation. Good luck tonight with the rest of your preparations all of this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to continue to work with you to make sure that this memorial, as well as other ones, remain to be able to teach and inform and inspire. And on that note, you are an inspiration. So thank you, Rima.
Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
So as we are transitioning from Rima on that note, I'd like to bring my other two guests up. We have Marcos Lutyens from Rose River Memorial and Brad Wolf from Reimagine. Welcome, you guys, to the podcast. I would love to start with a brief introduction of just where you're calling from and what you've been up to. We'll start with you, Marcos.
Hi, Kristen. We're very honored to be on the podcast. And I'm based in Los Angeles, and that's where I'm talking from.
Great. Thank you, Marcos, for joining us today. And Brad?
I am here in San Francisco, California, grateful to be here and honor the land of the Ohlone that I am sitting on today. And grateful to be with you, Kristen, and for this incredible work that you've been doing, and to become your friend in this work has been really special. And Marcos as well, to be honest. This is a great group.
So we just heard an incredible story of one individual's work to advance a memorial from their own personal loss. And a couple of reasons why I wanted to invite the two of you on to follow up, Rima, even though that's a tough act, I understand, is because the both of you have been heavily involved in this conversation about memorials and how do we begin to take on, memorializing what's happened and what's in a way to be able to heal. And Brad, I'd love to turn it over to you first off, because Reimagine is an incredible organization that really helps people deal with the tough things that are going on through end of life, and have conversations and spaces where we can learn and grow and grieve together. And I'd love to hear from you just your thoughts on how do we approach this moment of great loss and death and tragedy in a way that honors what happens, but also ensures that we're able to maybe one day turn the page and move on in a way that is respectful to what happened and what we've learned.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a fabulous question, and I do think this moment in history calls for something very different. COVID, as we know, it's takes place in our homes, in our cities. It's a virus that spreads everywhere. And when you're thinking about memorials, I believe that the memorials should reflect that. And you talked at the top about issues of justice. And I think in thinking about how we build and construct memorials around COVID, we have to also be thinking about justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, because there is an opportunity here that we need to step up to meet. And that is memorials. Yes, they're there for remembrance, but they're also there to create restorative environments, as you mentioned, for grief and for healing. And this all comes together in the sense that we can't just have one memorial in Washington, D.C., for example. that means people, who has access to that memorial. If that memorial becomes a restorative space for people in that area, in that environment, who is excluded from that space? And so at Reimagine, what we've been doing during the pandemic is to build restorative spaces. And nothing physical as of yet, but really during the pandemic, mostly online, hosting monthly vigils for folks to come together and to memorialize in a space that we've co-created that's a safe container to honor our loved ones. How do we do that and distribute something in our physical environments to meet people where we are? And to me, that means the memorials need to live and breathe in, just like Rima's where she lives, but in every community needs restorative spaces. Every city needs to have restorative spaces where folks can gather and grieve and allow us to embody that energy that is transformative for healing. And so, how do we work with our local governments to facilitate that? And then also, how might we consider online technology to intersect with those, to actually be able to meet people where they are? Because if where we are is online sometimes, and if where we are is in physical space sometimes, how do we create those spaces where we feel safe and actually bring that justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion and restoration into our hearts?
Restoration. I love, maybe we need a 6th R on the 5R policy platform. But that word restoration is so essential. And when I think about Reimagine, I would say that it is an organization that does create really meaningful and restorative spaces. But I also would say that, Marcos, you are a master at creating restorative experiences, and have, through the Rose River Memorial, been working to not only do a COVID memorial, but a COVID memorial that is a collective memorial. And I hope that you could share with us a little bit about what you've been up to with Rose River.
Thanks, Kristen. That was a really great explanation, description, Brad, of how memorials should be. And I'm an artist. That's what I do. And as an artist, I've always been interested in healing. In fact, I was mainly kind of formed, not in art school. I was formed in shamanic practices in Mexico and in South America. And for me, art has always been a question of healing. So when the pandemic struck, I was just devastated, because maybe I'm an empath, and I could kind of sense and feel the amount of pain and damage that was happening collectively. And so I started this project, Rose River Memorial. Originally, I started it with Tilly Hinton, and we got it going. What we wanted to do was a project that was derived from the community. We wanted something that was tangible, and where people could feel that they could actually do something themselves towards healing themselves, and also supporting families of those who'd lost members to COVID. And it's I just started in August. I could go on for a long time about what's been going on, but we've been doing a lot of memorials all over the country, often in collaboration with Marked by COVID members, such as Angela Kenda in St. Louis in Missouri. We're just working right now with Eileen Brooks in Bakersfield, and also in Southeast Texas, all marked by COVID. Jen and Jennifer Gonzalez and her sister. And we've been making thousands and thousands of roses. Like yesterday, we just inaugurated an installation in Kansas City in Missouri. We set up 10,000 roses that were made by the community. And the day before, we were in Bakersfield, and we paraded a sailing boat that belonged to David Shelton, who was Eileen Brooks' dad. We paraded that through the city, partly because we couldn't get acceptance to put an impermanent memorial, let alone a permanent memorial, anywhere in the town. even though we'd been talking to the mayor and also the member of Congress. I think one of the most moving events was the first March, the first Monday of March of this year, where the three of us came together to do a kind of online, partly online, partly in situ kind of Zoom podcast around the nation. And for me, that was the starting point of this kind of coming together to really think about memorialization and how it could become maybe permanent, especially how first of all, we needed to get the National COVID Memorial Day proclamation going, and based on that, perhaps find a way to reach out into communities to make permanent memorials.
Thank you, Marcos. And for folks who are joining us, I'm speaking with Marcos Lutyens, an artist and the originator of the Rose River Memorial, and Brad Wolf, co-founder and or founder of Reimagine. When we are talking about the importance of not only memorializing our loss, but asking these questions, how do we make memorials that really resonate with the depth and breadth of this experience? So Brad, I want to go, back to you. Marcos just chatted about how the three of us worked together on a vigil and memorial together, one in January and one in March. That was an incredible experience, both of those. And I think part of what really struck the chords for me deep in my heart was seeing how many people participated and just how necessary it was for individuals to participate in something with others who've been impacted and to have their losses recognized in a way, whether it was the saying of people's names or flashing pictures or going to a specific memorial that was being held in a community in some place in Texas or New Jersey or Arizona. But we really have focused on trying to highlight and uplift both the big and the grand, but also the small and profound. And so I'm just wanting to bring you in, Brad, to kind of build off of what Marcos was saying, as we kind of take on this idea of beginning to memorialize and have these, this opportunity for justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity. How do people get involved? What is a way for somebody who wants to express themselves in this way to, find their footing in this memorial journey?
Well, that's a really interesting question in terms of how folks can participate. I think, with someone like Marcos here and some of the other memorial creators, there's individual ways to participate, meaning that you can, with Marcos, you can actually contribute a flower. You can fold an origami red rose. And in the practice of making something, of creating something, of bringing something into life, that is a transformative experience with your own energy, if you will. So there is one example, as I mentioned before, coming to a vigil is a way. We like holding a space, as we, in terms of physically creating memorials in places that you live at scale. I mean, I would invite you to reach out to us, honestly, to Marcos and myself and KRISTIN. We're trying to build an initiative where we're thinking now about what are the principles that memorials would need to have in communities, and how can it be scalable and easy for communities to adapt and adopt memorials. And so we're trying to set the foundation for how our culture can move forward in that vein. So I think there's numerous entry points, but I'd also like to challenge the idea of this traditional memorial of being necessarily something grand and at scale in a community. I mean, when we think about just the idea of a distributed memorial system, or I mean, that could start by as simply as having something in your own house, an altar, a totem, something that reminds you of that person. If you have a business, if you're a business owner, can you put something on the wall? I mean, something that pays homage, that allows other folks to reflect on this experience, and then creates a sense of justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion in whatever space you're in, with that honoring. And that honestly is good for everyone. And I'm excited to hear where this conversation is about to turn, as I'm seeing questions emerge in the chat.
One of the things that this all makes me think about is just how, could memorials be a tool for bringing people together? And something that really struck me about the conversation, or about the conversation with Rima that we had at the beginning of the call, which is how that first day, how 20 people appeared at her memorial, and half of them hadn't even lost a loved one, but they wanted to participate and be there for their community. And with so much focus on, anti-vax, COVID denial, it makes me think that there actually could be a way to leverage memorials as an opportunity to unite and bring people together in our collective grief. I'm wondering if that resonates with you guys.
Yes, I completely agree. I was actually just in Europe a week ago, and I was sharing the memorial with some people there, and they were just completely stunned. They I mean, I don't want to put Europe down, but my friends were like, that would never happen in Europe. This kind of degree of collaboration, people coming together in all sorts of ways. In the Rose River Memorial, we've had a lot of help from Kiwanis and from Girl Scouts and from families who've lost members to COVID, and a lot of people who haven't lost members to COVID. It's just been incredible to see, to sense and feel that, collaboration coming from all different sectors of the community all across the states. That really gives you hope. I think, the press tends to kind of focus on the people that are, dividing us. But I think the vast majority is willing to help and come together, and, even sometimes admit that maybe they weren't quite right. And, we're all in a learning process here, and a healing process.
Yeah. Brad?
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful question. Because it's interesting to see what will happen. I can't predict, obviously, the future of what would happen in terms of the politicization of memorials. But I think what we've learned at Reimagine through doing this work around death is that there's this conversation around loss. It's something we've all experienced, but is taboo in our nation. We've done a survey, and almost 90% of people say that they think our culture makes it really challenging to talk about death and impermanence. But yet we've all experienced it. So no one really thinks they have a problem talking about it, but everyone thinks everyone else has a problem talking about it. And so no one talks about it. And so it's something that we bottle up. And I think when we turn our attention to a memorial, it does unlock a bit of our common humanity. That I hope can transcend politics. Now, I've been surprised at every turn during this pandemic of how politics has wedged itself into issues that feel so apolitical. But I think that's where this really it feels like this is the threshold at which I would be just beside myself. I don't know what we would say as a culture if memorials couldn't pull us together, and in that way, begin to indeed unlock and unleash the part of our common humanity that could invite people into because when you're denying, COVID denial is death denial. in some ways.
Mhm.
And when we and it's something we're all afraid of, right? There's a fear, but when you put it out with love, it has a way of breaking that down. So that's just my belief and my hope.
I really appreciate you sharing that with me. And it on the issue of politicizing, which is such a hard word for me to always say. I like fumble on it myself all the time. But on this issue of this like polarization, politicization of the virus, I do have a bit of good news as it comes to memorials. And I don't know if I've actually told the two of you, but our resolution at the US Conference of Mayors passed. And yes, good work all. So for folks who aren't familiar with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, it is a nonprofit that represents America's largest cities. It was actually born out of um, the 1930s during the Great Depression in response to cities needing direct support from the federal government in order to provide for its constituents. And since then, the conference has, on an annual basis, come together to discuss issues that are impacting cities and has created basically an agenda for itself every year. And this year, the Conference of Mayors took up the issue of a COVID Memorial Day and memorials and put it on their agenda to advance and before a permanent COVID Memorial Day. And the reason why I bring this up in the context of politics is that I know the three of us have done a lot of work to get mayors and others involved on the issue of memorials. And something that just opened my eyes was that this resolution that we worked on together is supported by mayors in big cities, in rural communities, Republicans, Democrats, independents. I mean, really just a very broad, bipartisan coalition of folks who, without a blink of an eye, said, yeah, of course I'll support this. And, to that sort of, I can't predict the future myself either, but seeing the momentum behind this conversation of memorials in the mayor space, it does give me hope. It gives me hope that it is something that we can unite around and build from a place, like you said, of love, Brad.
Let's do it, KRISTIN.
I love
Marcos,
it.
let's do it.
Yeah, you've already done. We've already done so much. We just got to keep going a little bit more. But yeah, we'd love to hear more from the audience about how they see memorials and a kind of transition to permanent memorialization, especially as we're kind of transitioning from this idea of a pandemic to an endemic, and is something that goes on and on. How does one memorialize that? It needs to be kind of refreshed.
Yeah. And as we have this newest surge, the people who are survivors are, their experience is so different than my experience was a year ago. A year ago, my dad got sick, and he was sick because he believed, actually, as I say this, I'm walking back on myself. He was a victim of disinformation, and a lot of people who are passing right now are also victims of disinformation. It's just disinformation in a different type of information. And so I think that we could also probably get to a bigger conversation that's absolutely needed in this country and abroad about how to tackle dis and misinformation too, by really digging into what we've lost as a result of it. Well, I know that we have been on for a bit, and I don't want to take too much of your time, much more, but I did have a couple of final questions. First off, for you all on the call today, I'm curious to hear how can COVID survivors be active in this work? What is it best for folks who want to see memorialization to do, to be an advocate, to advance this work?
Marcos, you want to go first, or shall I
Yeah,
chime?
I mean, for instance, if you'd like to be involved in the Rose River Memorial, our website is Rose River, www.roseriver.memorial, and you can see the projects that we've worked on, and you could reach out, just shoot me an email, or find us on Instagram as well. We're Rose River Memorial. Send me a text or an email, and the kits that can be purchased online at the site, or if you're thinking of maybe co-hosting an event or a memorial, we could talk about that. We've been working all across the United States, so wherever you are, we'd love to hear from you.
And Brad?
I mean, this question of how can survivors, how can they testify, how can they advocate? When we talk about advocating for this, there's a couple different levels of advocacy I think we're talking about. One, I think, is what Marcos just mentioned. You can participate in a physical memorial that exists, like the Rose River Memorial, which you should do. Two, we need to advocate for more spaces in our communities. And again, I guess with that in mind, I know that that KRISTIN, you and Marked by COVID, with Marcos as well, is about to begin organizing a group that we're thinking about. I don't know if this is appropriate to share out, but I mean, we're trying to organize a group to think more about how we implement these memorials across the country. And so that is another great place, and Reimagine will have a role in supporting that effort as well. So that's one place. Now so that's advocating for the creation of more memorials, which is important. The final piece about how can they, testify, I think the thing about this is the idea of sharing your story. I mean, a part of this is there is, like anyone who's lost somebody, and I mentioned this a few minutes ago, right? Our culture makes it hard to share our stories about loss and grief. And, if you've gone through this, if you lost your relative, you don't want to be a burden on other people. You don't want to feel like you're weighing people's lives down. But that's not how it is. That's not actually what's happening in the receiver. Like we need to hear these stories, and I think our culture welcomes these stories, and it's because it's something we've all faced. It's not just for the survivors. We're all survivors in some way because we've been through all this loss as a country. I mean, some people are closer than others to a loved one. But the best way forward is to just keep sharing your story and know that it's okay to share your story. Keep sharing your story. And KRISTIN, you've been such an inspiration in that regard. And I hope that it's you, but what I'm hoping people take away from you is that it's okay to share your story, and people want to hear it. And it's not that just people want to hear it. Sharing it is powerful for you.
That's right. Yes, I love that. It's simple, but it's so effective. And sharing your story, living your truth, it has profound ripple effects to your audience and others, but it also is an important way in which to honor your own truth and what happened and what is happening to you. So I really appreciate that note, Brad.
And can I just share the last bit on that? I mean, KRISTIN, you and I have chatted about this before, but by doing nothing with your story, and I don't want to say nothing, but by holding it up and bottling it inside, that actually is detrimental to your own physical well-being.
Mm-hmm.
Now, releasing that story in service of helping others, and knowing that by telling your story, you are actually transforming our ability to memorialize in this country and educating others and helping others, know that you're not only in so doing, by helping others, you're also helping yourself. And it's this very symbiotic activity that you can engage in. So it's like, just if a week goes by and you haven't shared your story with somebody, I mean, everyone has their own process, but it is healthy to share.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah,
And that's what memorials are partially about.
Healthy to share. Well, thank you both for sharing your work and your vision and your beliefs, but as well as partnership and friendship in this work. It has been a great honor chatting with you all about memorials today. For folks tuning in, we're wrapping up a conversation about memorials and memorialization. Thank you so much to my guests, Marcos Letyens and Brad Wolf, as well as Rima Saman, who was on earlier today. I'm going to leave you all with a final housekeeping on tomorrow. Be sure to tune back in at 6:00 Eastern, and we'll be joined with historian Rosalind Williams to discuss the history of the concept of crisis in American life. So you're not going to want to miss that one. Thanks, everyone.